All right, it's now time for the best and worst of Friday the 13th, 1980. So I didn't grow up watching the Friday the 13th franchise. My parents were pretty strict about horror movies and things, so I didn't really watch a lot of Halloween or Friday the 13th or even A Nightmare on Elm Street growing up. But most of my horror movie experience was going over to my friend Jeff's house. Shout out to Jeff. In the 90s, though, we'd go over there and play Nintendo 64, watch horror movies, drink soda all night. But yeah, I didn't grow up watching these movies, really. It was mainly stuff like Goosebumps, Tales from the Crypt, X-Files, stuff like that. Then just kind of whatever was on HBO that night at my friend's house, you know? So, but the funny concept around Friday the 13th, 1980, and this had happened before, of course, with other movies, but essentially, director Sean Cunningham said to Victor Miller, he was like, look, man, Halloween is making boatloads of money. Let's just rip this thing off and make a movie. So, admittedly, Friday the 13th, the original, was just a straight up Halloween ripoff, essentially. And this movie is also the most Halloween type movie, I would say, in the franchise, just with the style of the movie in a lot of ways. Like Halloween, for example, there's a big time jump. You know, in Halloween, it's originally 1963, and then they skip ahead to 1978 for Halloween. And in this one, the opening of the movie is 1958, and then it skips ahead to present time. You know, 1979, 1980, whatever you want to say. You know, technically, if you want to call it when they were filming it or whatever have you. But and then some of the other similarities between the original Friday the 13th and Halloween are definitely some of the POV stuff. That's clearly something that people usually say is, you know, one of the things that was taken from Halloween for sure. You know, the killer stalking its victims kind of in the shadows and stuff, which also leads into the POV stuff. You know, you see the hand like pushing away the leaves in the trees and just kind of creeping around, which definitely has some of the Halloween vibes for sure. And basically, you know, once Halloween became so successful, I mean, in Hollywood, they know, like, a lot of this entertainment stuff can be cyclical and the trends and things can be gone so quick. So with Friday the 13th, I mean, when Halloween dropped, Sean Cunningham was like, we need to do something now. People clearly like this. They like this style. So we need to pump out something immediately. So, and what was kind of funny too is before a script was even made, they came out with an ad in Variety magazine calling the movie, which, like I said, wasn't even fucking written yet, calling it the most terrifying film ever made. So they had a little bit of pressure going into it for sure. But the original title for Friday the 13th, 1980 was actually going to be A Long Night at Camp Blood, which might sound a little bit more like a porn, maybe. But yeah. So the title ultimately helped, obviously, with the success of the movie and probably ended up being, you know, it was just much better, obviously, clearly. But Long Night at Camp Blood. I mean, I like anything that's got Camp Blood in the title, whether it's like a fan film or anything. I think that's just a cool, like, nickname for the camp. But Friday the 13th, obviously much better. But something that a lot of people don't know, though, is that there was actually a movie before Friday the 13th called Friday the 13th, The Orphan. I've never seen it. It was a little successful. So, you know, they didn't want to have like a lawsuit situation going on. They figured, Sean Cunningham figured this title, Friday the 13th, was a winner. He had some, you know, marketing firm, you know, some Don Draper dude write up and make a logo with his team and everything. And basically what ended up happening was this guy named Phil Scooter, I could never say this guy's name. Scuderi? He was essentially one of the big wigs up at Georgetown Productions, which is the production company that basically, you know, helped to make this movie, essentially. So they don't really know exactly what happened. I mean, it is the 80s, so it could have been anything. It could have been one of those situations where it's like, you know, I'm going to break your fucking kneecaps if you do anything about this. But he essentially, they say, paid them off, possibly. But it was finally resolved and there was no issue, so they got to keep the title. So, but yeah, I mean, one of the most iconic jump scares in the history of horror, for sure, in the original Friday the 13th, of course. But that idea of Jason appearing at the end of the movie was never actually in the original script. Originally, they were just going to end with Pamela Voorhees having her head chopped off, basically. And Alice was just kind of going to be floating on the lake, essentially. But Tom Savini was the one who actually suggested the jump scare at the end of the movie, inspired by Carrie. If you've seen Carrie, you know what I'm talking about. But they needed what they called like a chair jumper like that. So they're like, let's bring in Jason. And so that was born from that. But I mean, definitely one of the most iconic scores, musical tones in horror history and maybe in film history. And yeah, of course, like a lot of it is ripped off of Psycho, right? The like you get that. But one thing you'll notice in the movie that's kind of interesting too is they didn't, and I think it was part of the success too, is they didn't try to like just hammer you over the head with the music in this movie. You know, it's almost like a little treat in the movie. It's almost like a little bit of an event when you do get the iconic score in the movie. And a part of that was because they made a creative choice to only play the music when the killer was around, which also kind of showed you like, okay, the killer's creeping around. What's going to happen here? That kind of a thing. So, I mean, but shout out to Harry Manfredini. Like, damn, like, a little bit of a ripoff, but still, come on, I mean, I don't know which one was created first, but you get McDonald's and Big Mac. And if Burger King was invented after McDonald's, then, that's cool because the Big Mac or the Whopper is great. I like the Whopper over the Big Mac personally. So it's like this, the Psycho score, ultimately evolved into the Friday the 13th score. And I'm not mad about it, I'm good with it for sure. One of the things with this movie though, like I always hear, especially, a lot of people say, the original Friday the 13th, one of the worst in the franchise. The original Friday the 13th is boring. The original Friday the 13th, most people never have as their number one movie in the franchise, whatever. Probably the two biggest things that I hear about this movie that people don't like are the pacing of the movie. They think it's boring. They think it's slow. And also the whodunit aspect of the movie, right? The killer at the end of the movie is somebody you have never met before. So how the hell are you supposed to guess who it is? That's some of the biggest issues that people have with the movie, right? Still a great reveal at the end, great killer at the end, but how is it supposed to be a true whodunit when they don't lay out the breadcrumbs for you before that, right? So some of the issues people have with this movie and some of the biggest reasons why many don't consider this the best movie in the franchise. I know there's a lot of you that do, for sure. Let me know down in the comments if you're one of them. I don't blame you. I love so many things in this movie. I think this movie is a classic in so many ways. I think this movie is easily one of the scariest movies in the franchise. But, obviously the movie was a huge financial success. It was made for about $550,000. And ended up making $59.8 million. So immediately, Sean Cunningham and Victor Miller were like, holy shit, what just happened? Well, we beheaded the hairy-knuckled killer in the movie, so how can we make another one? But I'll talk more about that in a second, and in the next, I'll talk more about that when I talk about the next movies, of course. But, 1980, a sneaky big year for movies in some ways, One of the big years, definitely. There's some big releases in 1980. The Empire Strikes Back, Caddyshack, The Blues Brothers, John Carpenter's The Fog, of course, can't forget that. But also, like, what a May for movies. Like, you're getting ready for summer, spring just went down, you get in the yard ready, and you're like, hey, let's go see a movie in May. Get ready for summertime. It's already probably pretty damn hot. And in May, I mean, You've got The Shining, which came out 2 weeks after Friday the 13th. Kind of crazy, but also kind of a weird time for The Shining to come out in May when you're starting to release, like summer type movies. It's a movie about being secluded in a giant hotel in the winter. Kind of a weird choice. Friday the 13th makes sense, though. Definitely a very good movie to watch during the summer. Summer camp. I know a lot of the movies, have kind of a little bit of a fall, like late summer vibe to them. But still, they're swimming. They're having a great time. They're on vacation. Great movie to watch in the summer for sure. But what a May for horror in 1980. But this movie also has so much like sneaky ambiguity and mystery in this movie. Like, not only you're wondering throughout the movie, who the hell is slaughtering all these kids? Who's the mystery person behind this? But what's also the whole story behind this Jason kid? Like, who was the kid? Why was he bullied? We get a little glimpse into what he looks like, of course, but what really happened? So it's a little bit like Halloween also in that way, because the prequel stuff is left out and is left for us to kind of use our imagination to kind of think about that, which is always a good time to me. I like that when movies have that ambiguity. They don't give you too much, but they give you just enough and let kind of your mind go wild. Love that. But yeah, Friday the 13th, the original, kicked off, this almost like blue collar franchise, especially once Jason came around. It was a franchise where if you were going to the movies in the 80s or, in the 90s in some cases, and you were going to see a Friday the 13th movie, you kind of just knew what to expect. It was going to have a certain tone, a certain feel. You knew what was going to go down most of the time, right? There's a couple exceptions to that, but most of the time you knew what to expect. You know what you were getting yourself into. So it almost like a James Bond movie in that way. How, like, I'm going to go see a James Bond movie. He's probably going to, have sex with a bunch of girls, try to, be suave, and he's going to, be the international man of mystery, right? It's almost like that. You knew what to expect, and like, what to expect when you go to a Bond movie, the great score and certain things like that. So let's get into the good stuff. So what aged the best? To me, it's either got to be Betsy Palmer as the villain, or it's got to be Tom Savini's effects work. Mrs. Voorhees still to this day is easily one of my favorite horror villains in horror history. I just love her character. And Tom Savini's gore in this movie has still aged very well to me. It speaks for itself. And the effects they're not on the level of like a Rob Bottin from The Thing, which comes out 2 years after Friday the 13th in 1982. They're not quite on that level at this point in Tom Savini's career, in 1980. But this movie, it's still gory, it's fun, and the effects still have that goriness to them, but with a little bit of like an 80s charm. Like it looks real, but All right, and what has aged the worst in Friday the 13th, 1980? So, there's a few things here. Anytime you're talking about like an 80s horror movie, like Jesus, like how many things are we going to list off? But in this movie, of course, they killed a real snake. That's it's unfortunate for the little snake fella, but like I already mentioned a second ago, the main antagonist gets her head chopped off and all of a sudden has hairy knuckles. That's something that you'll notice, especially now when you're watching this movie on Blu-ray, right? But you've got the truck driver at the beginning of the movie, like getting a little handsy with Annie there. That doesn't, age too well, right? But little fun fact, though, the truck driver guy, he was actually Maurice. Maurice's voice in Beauty and the Beast, which was Belle's father. I don't think Belle would be too happy with you, dude. You horny old bastard. But, last but not least, another thing that probably hasn't aged the best was the whitest guy at camp, Ned, running around as a Native American chief in the movie. But, Probably hasn't aged that well. But anyways. Best character in Friday the 13th, 1980. Officer Dorf, for sure. I told you to sit on it, Tonto. No, but maybe it's Kevin Bacon's blue Speedo in the movie, you know? How about that one? Like, damn, Kev. My wife's watching this movie too. Come on now. No, but really, this is one of the few Friday the 13th movies in the franchise that doesn't purposely have a bunch of characters or a character that you're purposely just supposed to hate necessarily. I mean, there's probably one, what's his name, Ned, in the movie. I guess he could be the one, but in most of the Friday the 13th movies, not necessarily the early ones, but especially the later ones, there's characters who are just written to be the character you want to see get killed. The characters you're supposed to hate, who's just an asshole or a jackass or annoying or just objectively a bad person. Whereas in this movie, you don't really have that necessarily, because even the character who's like kind of annoying still is a decent person. He's just trying to fit in, So, but really though, best character for me has got to be Pamela Voorhees for me. She's just so good in this role. The most acclaimed actor in this movie up to that point. Kevin Bacon obviously has done what he's done, but up to that point had done a lot of things and, really didn't want to accept this role in the beginning because it kind of seemed like a step down for her. But they were going to pay her like $1,000 a week, I think it was, and she needed a new car, and she was like, all right, let's do it. So she brought like all those skills and training to the table and just killed it as Mrs. Voorhees, like I've already talked about. But this movie, like Betsy Palmer, though, surprisingly, she was only 54 when she filmed this movie. You guys feel like me when you watch some of these movies? Your movies are weird. Like, people look older. Like, yeah, Mrs. Voorhees, like, she's pretty spry in this movie. Like, she's agile. She's holding her own, doing her thing, killing people, beating the shit out of Alice. But I don't know. She just looks older to me. It's like the cast of The Thing. Like when you go back and look at The Thing, or just when you watch the movie and you're watching The Thing, the original, the Thing from John Carpenter's The Thing. You're watching it and you're like, oh, these guys are like 60. And then you look at them, and then you actually look at how old they were in the movie. And I mean, I'm not talking about Kurt Russell, but everybody else. You look at actually how old they were in the movie, and they were like 35. You're like, damn. Back in the 80s, man, that J&B scotch and 14 cigs a day was really doing work on these fellas. But it's just kind of funny, like. But back on topic, I mean, there's also something about Mrs. Voorhees in this movie. Those close-ups on the teeth, just the close-ups on her face, showing her, emotion, her like. Just like the absolute, like, I don't know, I don't want to say the meanness in her, but just the vengefulness in her eyes and her face, I mean, but they just don't make teeth like that anymore, do they? You know what I mean? Like, back in the 80s, that's an underrated little tidbit from 80s movies. You know what I mean? Just the realistic teeth in the movies, right? Like, they just don't make them like that anymore. Like, nowadays, you see horror movies and stuff, and they're supposed to be like gritty and dirty and brutal, but everybody's got perfect teeth. You know what I'm saying? So there's just something about the teeth, the underrated Betsy Palmer teeth. It's just too good. But, you know what I'm saying? Like, when Mrs. Voorhees is like, kill her, mommy. You're like, that, I could just see her being an old lady sitting next to me when I'm 8 years old in church with bad breath. Right? But an actual, like, an underrated character, I don't think it's talked about enough in the original Friday, is actually Brenda to me. I like Brenda. I feel like Brenda could have been the final girl in this movie, I do. Like, if they gave her some more lines, I feel like she could have pulled that off. She's smart. She's likable. She's cute. She seems like she's really athletic. But I'll talk more about her in a second. But I also really like Annie's character. I think Annie's character is kind of the perfect character to show as the first counselor in the modern time. You know, she's like, comes across as like so innocent and sweet, and she just is gonna go and cook for these kids and be the counselor, and then what ends up happening to her. She's like an underrated, really good character to set the tone for the rest of the movie, in my opinion. But worst character, all right. For me, it's gonna be Ned. You know, like I said a second ago, Ned's kind of supposed to be that character, but he's not outright bad or a terrible person, but he's just an annoying little shit. You know, he's like he says that line at the archery range. He's like, you know, you're beautiful when you're mad, sweetheart. You know what I mean? And it's just, he's supposed to be that guy, but he's just kind of an annoying little shit. But by the way, does anyone else wonder about Steve Christie's story in this movie? I kind of want to know more about Steve Christie. Like, is he banging Sandy at the diner? Is he? Was it the blue, like the big blue glasses, or the curly hair, Steve? Which one was it, Steve? You know what I mean? But really though, Sandy was thirsting for Steve-O to keep her warm that cold, rainy night, though. But Steve Christie, yeah, I'd like to know a little bit more about Steve Christie's backstory and his like link to the camp in more ways than we get in the movie. But best line in the movie, for me, it'd be Officer Dorf. Remember the guy that shows up to the camp on the motorcycle? When he asks Kevin Bacon if he's high, he goes, "What you been smoking, boy? Would you just get off a spaceship or something? Colombian gold, man. Grass, hash, the weed." Great line. But also, of course, in the original Friday, you get Crazy Ralph, who I think he's really good for this movie in a lot of ways. Like, he adds something that you forget about in this movie, because at times you forget almost that it's a horror movie in a way. You're like, oh, they're just hanging out at camp, nothing's really happening, nobody's died in a while, and then boom, oh shit, that's right, that Crazy Ralph guy's around. Is he doing this? I mean, he seems crazy. He could be. He's coming out of he's like hanging out in storage closets, saying weird stuff, like he's sent from God. But I mean, Crazy Ralph's line, you know, "You're going to Camp Blood, ain't you? You'll never come back again. It's got a death curse." Good line, classic line from the movie, of course. But worst line, for me, it'd probably be Bill. When Alice sees the snake, he's just very robotic with what he says. He's like, "What do I do?" And Alice is like, "Kill it. It might bite." Like, come on, Bill, give us a little something there. Or back to the truck driver, another bad line from the truck driver. It's like, "All the girls up there are gonna look as good as you?" It's like, come on, man, relax, all right? Relax. I mean, he's taking his shot. I get it, but come on, man. All right, best kill. For me, probably not surprising. It's Jack's death. The Baconator. And kind of a sneaky underlying story to that kill. Pamela Voorhees is, you know, she's into voyeurism a little bit, I guess, apparently, you know? Like, how long was she under that bed? How long was she waiting for something to go down, right? She was also nice enough to let Jack, you know, bust one last nut and get a little buzz going before taking him out. But, you know, before making him gargle to death in his own blood, essentially. But for this kill, you got to watch the Blu-ray too, because you get the 3 shots in the Blu-ray, in the uncut version, I guess. You get the shot, you get the head-on shot with, you know, where they, you know, Mrs. Voorhees does the grab, which is great. You get the side shot, little side view of it coming out of the neck initially. And then in the uncut version, you get the head-on shot where the Tom Savini's assistant like blew the blood too hard out of the tube, and it like shoots up almost into Kevin Bacon's like face and stuff like this. Adds a kind of a nice little touch to the kill. So you got to watch that one on the Blu-ray, the uncut version. But I also think Marcy's kill's kind of a fun one too. Yeah, it's a little ridiculous when she just freezes up and she's like, please, no. But it's a fun one still. She gets the axe to the face. We get to see the after effects of that, which look great. Even to this day, even on Blu-ray, still looks really, really good. But yeah, just a good kill. I like that little detail of how the axe hits the light above her. Adds a little bit of a realistic kind of touch to it. I like that. That was a good little touch by Savini there. Underrated little piece there. But worst kill. I know some people would probably say it's, the opening little double kill there or Steve's death. But for me, I'm going to go a little different here. I'm actually going to go with Brenda's death, because Brenda getting killed at the archery range, which was also an off-screen one. But for me, it was just because of like the potential of that kill, how great that kill could have been. I just wish we could have seen that one. Like Bill's was kind of similar, but we get to see like that, just the badass aftermath of that. We get to get Alice's scream. We get to see him, hung up on the door with a bunch of arrows through him. Just a great shot there of it. One of the cool shots of the movie for me was seeing Bill up on the door when Alice swings the door open. But yeah, besides the fact that you see Harry Crosby, the actor, his eyes moving a little bit, now that we're watching things in high def, his eyes moving around a little bit right there, which I guess could be realistic. Maybe not. I don't know. Maybe he's still a little alive or his body's twitching. But yeah, no, but Harry Crosby, by the way, if you didn't know, his dad was the super duper famous back in the day, like before TikTok time. He was movie star and singer Bing Crosby. If you ever heard your great grandma maybe talking about Bing Crosby, like this guy was like, he was the dude. He was just the dude. He was Sinatra before Sinatra. But Harry ended up, I was always wondering, okay, so he comes from such a famous lineage. What did he do after Friday the 13th? He actually only did one other movie and then just kind of said, fuck entertainment. And went on and chased the big money and got into like private equity and investment banking and is probably just swimming in cash now. But yeah, that's what he did after Friday the 13th, basically, if you're ever curious. So, but best moment. So I've got two that kind of stand out for me. And the first one being when Pamela first shows up, and she just says, I'm Mrs. Voorhees, a friend of the Christies. That moment is just such a crazy blend of relief, but also has like this weird, ominous feel to it. And you can tell that Alice feels the same way in that moment. And then it leads into, of course, like the big fight scene, which is fun, which is great. And then obviously, the beheading of Mrs. Voorhees, which is also iconic. The slow motion moment there is just great. It all leads into that. The other moment for me has got to be the big jump scare at the end. Jason popping out of the lake. Was Jason real? Is it just a dream? Is it like what happened here, right? I love the calm music. It's the only time in the movie that, besides when the killer's around and we hear the normal score, it's the only other time in the movie where they really try to use music to kind of like manipulate the audience. She's on the lake, it's peaceful, it's the next morning. They definitely give you that vibe of, okay, it's over. People who have seen Carrie maybe were thinking something else, but it gives you that type of a vibe. You've got the calm music playing. And if you were in the theater in 1980, I wasn't, obviously, but if you were, maybe you were like, all right, okay, whew, it's over. You're starting to grab your jacket. You're taking your last sip of the Pepsi, getting ready to wrap things up, and then boom, the jump scare happens. One of the most iconic jump scares in horror for sure. So, I didn't know this actually. Jason for this, like just the initial look of Jason was actually modeled after a bum that Tom Savini saw as a kid, who kind of had like a Quasimodo kind of a look to him. Savini, I guess, couldn't get that out of his head in a way, which is kind of like a lot of bums have influenced the best horror movies ever. Like Freddy Krueger was influenced by some weird like homeless guy that Wes Craven saw as a kid, and Jason was inspired by a homeless dude that Tom Savini saw as a kid. So yeah, shout out to the homeless guys out there, I guess. But worst moment of the movie for me, probably, like I said, this isn't a movie I hate, but worst moment for me, I'd have to say, is watching Alice make coffee for like 2 minutes. 2 minutes straight of her just making coffee before she goes out to look for Bill. It's probably the worst moment of the movie. You know, this is a time in the movie where you have a chance when you're making the movie to throw in just more and more and more action, more shit going on. And I get it. I really like the creepiness and how the movie kind of slows down. I don't necessarily, I've made a video on this before, but I don't necessarily knock the original Friday for being a little slower. I like the pacing of it in some ways, how it takes its time to create that kind of creepiness and that eeriness. It's not just like a super fast-paced cut, kill kind of a thing. So I like that. But this scene is just, I mean, it's like, come on, guys. 2 minutes of her making coffee. Is this necessary, right? Like, come on now. But there you go. That is the best and worst of Friday the 13th, 1980. Hope you enjoyed it. If you enjoy horror content like this, then make sure you subscribe for sure. Check out one of these videos next to me if you want more content from me right now. Let me know down in the comments down below what other movies I should do a best and worst of. But anyways, everybody, take care of yourselves, and I'll see you in the next one. All right? Stay safe out there.